This is a Global Tellink prepaid call from
Adnan Syed,
an inmate at a Maryland Correctional Facility.
From This American Life and WBEZ Chicago, it's Serial, one story told week by week. I'm Sarah Koenig. For the last year, I've spent every working day trying to figure out where a high school kid was for an hour after school one day in 1999. Or if you want to get technical about it, and apparently I do, where a high school kid was for 21 minutes after school one day in 1999. This search sometimes feels undignified on my part. I've had to ask about teenagers' sex lives, where, how often, with whom, about notes they passed in class, about their drug habits, their relationships with their parents. And I am not a detective or a private investigator. I'm not even a crime reporter. But yes, every day this year, I've tried to figure out the alibi of a 17-year-old boy. Before I get into why I've been doing this, I just want to point out something I'd never really thought about before I started working on this story. And that is, it's really hard to account for your time, in a detailed way, I mean. How'd you get to work last Wednesday, for instance? Drive, walk, bike? Was it raining? Are you sure? Did you go to any stores that day? If so, what did you buy? Who did you talk to? The entire day, name every person you talked to. It's hard. Now imagine you have to account for a day that happened 6 weeks back, because that's a situation in the story I'm working on, in which a bunch of teenagers had to recall a day 6 weeks earlier. And it was 1999, so they had to do it without the benefit of texts or Facebook or Instagram. Just for a lark, I asked some teenagers to try it. Do you remember what you did on that Friday?
Not at all. I can't remember anything.
Wait, nothing?
No, I can't remember anything that far back. I'm pretty sure I was in school. I think. No?
That's Tyler. He's 18. I asked my nephew, Sam. He's 18 too.
not a clue. In school, probably. I would be in school. Actually, I think I worked that day. No, yeah, I worked that day, and I went to school. That was about it.
Actually, on second thought,
I don't think I went to school that day.
you don't think you went.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I definitely didn't.
Here's Sam's friend Elliot. He seemed to have better recall.
Actually, I may have gone to the movies that night later.
Do you remember what you
Now
saw?
that I'm thinking. I'm sorry, yeah, I think I saw 22 Jump Street.
Okay. And did you go with friends?
Yeah. I went with Sam and kid Sean, Carter, a bunch of people.
Wait, Sam, my nephew Sam?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So Sam says he was at work.
Oh, then it wasn't that night then.
One kid did actually remember pretty well because it was the last day of state testing at his school, and he'd saved up to go to a nightclub. That's the main thing I learned from this exercise, which is no big shocker, I guess, is that if some significant event happened that day, you remember that, plus you remember the entire day much better. If nothing significant happened, then the answers get very general. I most likely did this, or I most likely did that. These are words I've heard a lot lately. Here's the case I've been working on. Almost 15 years ago, on January 13th, 1999, a girl named Hae Min Lee disappeared. She was a senior at Woodlawn High School in Baltimore County in Maryland. She was Korean, she was smart and beautiful and cheerful and a great athlete. She played field hockey and lacrosse. And she was responsible. Right after school, she was supposed to pick up her little cousin from kindergarten and drop her home, but she didn't show. That's when Haley's family knew something was up, when the cousin's school called. About a month later, on February 9th, Hae's body was found in a big park in Baltimore, really a rambling forest. A maintenance guy who said he'd stopped to take a leak on his way to work discovered her there. He'd noticed a bit of her black hair poking out of a shallow grave. The cause of death was manual strangulation, meaning someone did it with their hands. A couple weeks after that, so 6 weeks after she first went missing, Hae's ex-boyfriend, a guy named Adnan Syed, was arrested for her murder. He's been in prison ever since. first heard about this story more than a year ago when I got an email from a woman named Rabia Chowdhury. Rabia knows Adnan pretty well. Her younger brother Saad is Adnan's best friend. And they believe he's innocent. Rabia was writing to me because way back when, I used to be a reporter for the Baltimore Sun, and she'd come across some stories I'd written about a well-known defense attorney in Baltimore who'd been disbarred for mishandling client money. That attorney was the same person who'd defended Adnan, her last major trial, in fact. Rabia told me she thought the attorney botched the case. Not just botched it, actually, but threw the case on purpose so she could get more money for the appeal. The lawyer had died a few years later. She'd been sick. Rabia asked if I would please just take a look at Adnan's case. I don't get emails like this every day, so I thought, sure, why not? I read a few newspaper clips about the case, looked up a few trial records, and on paper, the case was like a Shakespearean mashup. Young lovers from different worlds, thwarting their families, secret assignations, jealousy, suspicion, and honor besmirched. The villain, not a Moor exactly, but a Muslim all the same. And a final act of murderous revenge. And the main stage, a regular old high school, across the street from a 7-Eleven. Hi, are you Rabia? Hi. Am I saying your name correctly? Rabia, okay. I went to go see Rabia. She was surrounded by paper. Files, loose stacks, binders, some crappy-looking boxes. All court documents and attorney's files from Adnan's case. Some of the papers were warped and discolored.
Why do they look wet? They look like wet.
These have been damaged because these...
She explained that it was because the boxes had been in her car, on and off, for 15 years. Rabia is a lawyer herself. She mostly does immigration stuff. Her office takes up the corner of a much larger open space that I think is a Pakistani travel agency, though it's hard to tell. It's in this little strip mall. Across the parking lot, there's a new Pakistani restaurant, an African evangelical church, an Indian clothing shop, a convenience store. On the sidewalk outside, I found a teeny-weeny bag of marijuana. Baltimore County is like this, at least on the west side. It's where a lot of middle-class and working-class people go, many immigrants included, to get their kids out of the badass city, though the badass city is close by. Rabia's 40. She's short and she's got a beautiful round face framed by hijab. She's adorable looking, but you definitely shouldn't mess with her. She's very smart and very tough, and she could crush you. Her brother Saad was at Rabia's office too the first time I went. He's 33, mortgage broker, more laid back than Rabia. They told me about Adnan Syed, their friend. Not just a good kid, but an especially good kid. Smart, kind, goofy, handsome. So that when he's arrested for murder, so many people who knew him were stunned.
He was like the community's golden child.
Oh, really? Talk more about that.
He was an honor roll student, volunteer EMT. He was like on the football team. He was a star runner on the track team. He was the homecoming king. He led prayers at the mosque. So he was, everybody knew Adnan to be, somebody who's going to do something really big.
I later fact-checked all these accolades, of course, and learned that Rabia was mostly right, though she sometimes gets a little loosey-goosey with the details. Adnan was an EMT, but he didn't volunteer. He was paid for it. He was on the track team, but he wasn't a star. He did play football, and he did lead prayers on occasion. He wasn't homecoming king, but he was prince of his junior prom, and this at a high school that was majority black. They picked a Pakistani Muslim kid. So you get the picture. He was an incredibly likable and well-liked kid. This conversation with Rabia and Saad, this is what launched me on this year-long, obsession is maybe too strong a word, let's say fascination with this case. By the end of this hour, you're going to hear different people tell different versions of what happened the day Haley was killed. But let's start with the most important version of the story, the one Rabia told me first, and that's the one that was presented at trial. The state's case against Adnan went like this. He and Hay had been going out since junior prom, but Adnan wasn't supposed to be dating at all. Adnan was born in the U.S., but his parents are from Pakistan, and they're conservative Muslims. No drinking, no smoking, no girls, all that. Saad and Rabia's parents are the same way. Their families are friends. But even though Adnan and Saad and their buddies were Muslims, they were also, shall we say, healthy American teenagers who were going to do what teenagers do, so long as they didn't get caught. So Adnan had to keep his relationship with Hayes secret. The state used this against him in two ways. First, they argued he'd put everything on the line, his family, his relationships at the mosque, to run around with this girl, so that when she broke up with him 8 months later, he was left with nothing, and he was outraged. He couldn't take it, and he killed her. And the second way they used it is they said, look at what a liar he is, how duplicitous. He plays the good Muslim son at home and at the mosque, but look what he was up to. Saad remembers the prosecutor's closing argument at trial.
His family didn't know that he actually drank, he smoked, he was having sex.
This was proof of bad character, someone who could be a murderer. But Saad says if Adnan's guilty of anything, it's of being a normal kid with immigrant parents.
So like the prosecution had painted Adnan as a totally like a bipolar or like a maniacal dual personality.
We all grew up with that dual personality.
It is forced. I mean, I'm the same way. I was like, they could paint the same thing because I was actually homecoming king, which I don't know if my sister even knows. She did not know. So, I mean, I was dating a girl that was...
Wait. And why is Homecoming King bad? Is that such like a good thing?
We don't go to homecoming. We don't.
Because it's a dance.
It's a dance. It's a mixed gender.
So I was in the same boat. My parents, my sister, they didn't know about this at all. I mean, right now, more than 10 years later, she's finding out. You know, I know. I mean, I'll admit, on one side, like my family thinks I'm a virgin, but on the other hand, I play, But it's
TMI.
Exactly. See that? Like that right there. I mean, it's kind of making her feel uncomfortable. She's like, whoa.
So just on motive alone, Saad and Rabia found the whole thing ridiculous. As for physical evidence, there was none. Nothing. Apart from some fingerprints in Hayes' car, which Adnan had been in many times, there was nothing linking him to the crime. No DNA, no fibers, no hairs, no matching soil from the bottom of his boots. Instead, what they had on Adnan was one guy's story, a guy named Jay. He's the third person you need to remember in this crime story, besides Hay and Adnan. Jay was a friend of Adnan's. They'd been in school together since middle school. They weren't super close, but they had mutual friends. Jay sold weed, and he and Adnan smoked together. The story Jay told police had problems, because it kept changing from telling to telling. But they were able to bolster the main plot points using cell records from Adnan's phone. By the time I left Rabia's office that first day, I understood only one thing clearly, though maybe not the thing Rabia and Saad wanted me to understand. But what I took away from the visit was, somebody is lying here. Maybe Adnan really is innocent. But what if he isn't? What if he did do it, and he's got all these good people thinking he didn't? So either it's Jay or it's Adnan, but someone is lying. And I really wanted to figure out who. In the early morning of February 28th, 1999, Adnan was arrested by Baltimore City detectives. He was asleep in his bed when they showed up at his house. They took him straight from his untidy bedroom to an interrogation room at Homicide downtown. What Adnan didn't know is that just hours before they picked him up, the cops had interviewed his friend Jay.
This is a taped interview of Jay, black male, 19 years of age. We're at the offices of Homicide, specifically the Colonel's conference room.
The police recorded 2 taped interviews with Jay, and I'm going to play you the second one from a couple weeks later, only because the sound quality is much better. Just a warning that the tape is a little upsetting to hear in parts.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us what you know about the death of Haley?
Okay. Left out, went shopping with a friend of mine, an ex-friend of mine, and we had a conversation. During the conversation, he stated that he was going to kill that bitch, referring to Haley. I took it with context. It didn't stand out my head any.
Jay says he didn't take it too seriously. The cops have him start again from the top. On the morning of the 13th, Jay says, Adnan had left school and driven to Jay's house. Jay had graduated from school the year before and was working, but not on that day. January 13th happens to be the birthday of Jay's girlfriend, Stephanie, and Jay, who didn't have his own car, needed to go buy something for her. So Adnan comes over. According to Jay, they go shopping at the mall.
When did you do that?
He left the mall. I took him to school. I dropped him off in the back of the school. He went up to class. He left his cell phone in the car with me. Told me he'd call me. I went back to my friend Jen's house and waited for him to call.
Okay, now at this point, you know why he's leaving the car with you.
Yes,
And why is that?
because he said he was going to kill Eddie.
And the reason you have the car and the cell phone was why?
To pick him up from wherever he was going to do this.
Okay. And you had talked about this while you were shopping that day?
The details of the car and all.
The events, how they were going to plan out.
That day he told me, yes, he told me, I'm going to leave you with my cell phone and my car. I need you to come get me. Yes.
After
He had killed Eddie, yes.
Later that afternoon, the call comes.
you received a phone call from Adnan
Yes.
on his cell phone,
Yes.
which is in your possession.
Yes.
And the conversation was what?
That bitch is dead. Come and get me. I'm at Best Buy.
Jay drives to Best Buy and sees Adnan in the parking lot.
I noticed that he wasn't with him. I parked next to him. He asked me to get out the car. I get out the car. He asked me, am I ready for this? And I say, ready for what? And he takes the keys, he opens the trunk, and all I can see is like his lips are all blue, and she's like pretzeled up in the back of the trunk, and she's dead.
They leave the parking lot. Adnan's driving Hayes' car with her body in the trunk. Jay is driving Adnan's car. They ditch Hayes' car at the I-70 park and ride, and then, to hear Jay tell it, they just kind of tool around Baltimore County together for a while as if nothing had happened. Buy some weed, cruise around, make some calls. After a while, Jay drives Adnan back to Woodlawn High School.
Why did you take him back to school?
He told me that I had to take him back to school because he needed to be seen there.
So was he going to a certain event?
It's practice, track practice.
Track practice.
Yeah.
So he wanted an alibi.
Yes.
He wanted to be seen by the people at track.
Yeah.
And you guys had discussed that.
He just told me that he needed to be seen. Yes. He told me that he needed to be seen at track practice.
You took him back?
Yes.
Are you having any conversation with Adnan at the time?
To the effect, yes. Don't tell anyone. He said that he couldn't believe he killed somebody with his bare hands, that all the other motherfuckers referring to like hoods and thugs and stuff think they're hardcore, but he just killed a person with his bare hands.
So at this point he's bragging about it.
Basically.
He was proud of it?
Yes.
After track practice, Jay picks Adnan up again. They drive around some more. By this time, Hayes' family was worried, and they'd called the police, who in turn called a couple of Hayes' friends, including Adnan. The call comes in on his cell. The cops ask if he's seen Hay or knows where she is. Jay says after the call, they drive to Jay's to get some shovels, go retrieve Hayes' car from the park and ride. They drive around some more, and finally end up at Leakin Park, where Adnan proceeds to bury Hay. It's evening by now, maybe 7 or 8 p.m.
And he asked me if I was going to help. And I told him, fuck no. And he starts just shoveling dirt on top of it. After we leave there,
Let me stop a minute.
yes,
You helped him dig the hole.
yes.
How long did it take you both to dig the hole?
20, 25 minutes.
How deep did you make the hole?
Oh, maybe 6 inches at the most. It wasn't very deep at all.
Who did most of the digging?
It was,
Both of you.
yeah,
Equal work.
I wouldn't say that, but yeah.
Okay.
So those are the key points. Adnan told Jay in advance he was going to do it. He did it. They buried her. Jay's story wasn't just the foundation of the state's case against Adnan. It was the state's case against Adnan. And the picture Jay drew, it's cold. I mean, he's not describing a crime of passion here. This is something much darker. To methodically map out the death of your friend, to strangle her with your own hands, so close up like that. That would mean Adnan wasn't just a killer, but a master liar and manipulator. A psychopath, probably. Adnan's in a maximum security prison in Western Maryland. He calls me at my request about twice a week. He talks to me from a bank of 8 payphones in the rec hall, a pretty large room where other guys are sitting at tables with metal seats attached to them, playing chess or cards or using the microwave or watching TV. It can get a little loud sometimes. Once I asked if all 8 phones were always occupied, and he said usually not, because guys who've been in for a long time, often they have no one to call. When I first met Adnan in person, I was struck by 2 things. He was way bigger than I expected, barrel-chested and tall. In the photos I'd seen, he was still a lanky teenager with struggling facial hair and sagging jeans. By now he was 32. He'd spent nearly half his life in prison, becoming larger and properly bearded. And the second thing, which you can't miss about Adnan, is that he has giant brown eyes, like a dairy cow. That's what prompts my most idiotic lines of inquiry. Could someone who looks like that really strangle his girlfriend? Idiotic, I know. When he first heard Jay's story of the crime, Adnan didn't say, well, it didn't happen like that, or I didn't mean for it to happen like that. He said, it didn't happen. None of this is true, at all. He says he had nothing to do with Hay's murder, and he doesn't know who did. Hay was Adnan's first serious relationship with a girl. He says he loved her in the way of high school love, but then also in the way of high school got over her. So that when they broke up for good, sometime before Christmas break of senior year, he says he was sad for sure, but not obsessed or anything.
I just sometimes wish they could look into my brain and see how I really felt about her. And no matter what else someone would say, they would see, man, this guy had no ill will towards it. Whatever the motivation is to kill someone, it didn't exist in me. You know what I mean? No one can ever say why. People can say why. Oh man, he was mad, this, that, or the other, but no one can ever come with any type of proof or anecdote or anything to ever say that I was ever mad at her, that I was ever angry with her, that I ever threatened her. You know, that's the only thing I can really hold on to. And it's my only firm handhold of this whole thing is that no one's ever been able to prove it. No one ever has been able to provide any shred of evidence that it had anything but friendship towards it, love and respect for her. That's at the end of the day, man. The only thing I can ever say is, man, I had no reason to kill her.
He's adamant about this. You can hear it, right? He's staunch. The problem is, when you ask Adnan to go back and tell his version of what happened that day, to refute Jay's story, everything becomes a lot mushier. Yes, he hung out with Jay on the 13th, both during and after school, but he doesn't remember exactly where they went, or what they did, or what time it was. Here's what he's got. January 13th unfolded like any other day, a normal, mostly uneventful day. He says there are a couple of things that do stand out, though. That day was Stephanie's birthday. Stephanie was one of Adnan's best friends, and also Jay's girlfriend. Adnan had gotten Stephanie a birthday present, a stuffed reindeer, which he'd given to her in second period, Miss Efron's English class.
And it occurred to me that day that I was going to ask her boyfriend, Jay, did he get her a gift? So sometime during the day, before noon.
Wait, Adnan, just hold up for a second. Why did you care whether Jay got Stephanie a present? What's it to you?
Well, Stephanie was a very close friend of mine, as I mentioned, and it was just, I just kind of wanted to make sure that she also got a gift from him. You know, she had mentioned to me that she was looking forward to getting a gift from him. she mentioned she was really happy to get the gift that I gave her. So it just, as I would with any friend, I just kind of, went to check on that. I kind of had a feeling that maybe he didn't get her a gift. And I had free periods during school, so it wasn't like, it was not abnormal for me to leave school to go do something and then come back. So I went to his house, and I asked him, did you happen to get a present for Stephanie? He said no. So I said, if you want to, you can drop me back off to school. You can borrow my car, and you can go to the mall, get her a gift or whatever, and just come pick me up after track practice that day.
So then what happened?
Well, then, when school was over, I would have went to the library. I knew that I usually check, well, I didn't usually check, but if I was going to check my email, it would be using the library computer. Sometimes I would go there because track practice didn't start until around maybe 3 o'clock or 3:30ish. So it didn't start right after school. So there was a period of time of almost like an hour and some change. That was kind of free time.
This hour and change after school, this is the crucial window. This is the time when the state says Hae was killed. School got out at 2:15. People remember seeing her after her last class, heading to her car. According to Jay's story and the cell phone records, she was dead by 2:36 p.m. So sometime in those 21 minutes, between 2:15 and 2:36, she was strangled. So that's obviously the same window Adnan needed to account for. To quote Adnan, my case lived and died in those 21 minutes. So where does Adnan say he was? Well, maybe the library, but nobody testified to that at trial. Then to track practice. He does remember being at track one day when it was snowing, which might have been that day. The coach testified that Adnan probably was there, but he can't be 100% sure because, as a rule, he didn't take attendance. After school is when his memories become non-specific. Usually we did this, or we probably would have done that.
Probably track practice would have ended, like I say, 4:30.
Jay did come to pick up Adnan after track. That part Adnan seems to more or less remember. It was Ramadan, so Adnan would have been fasting all day and hungry.
It probably would have been close to time for me to break fast. He would have came and picked me up, and we would have went to go get something to eat. And then we would smoke some weed after, right? And then I would have had to have been home by like around 7, 8 o'clock, right? Or usually like the last 10 nights of Ramadan, my father would spend the night at the mosque. So a lot of times I would take him food. Like my mother would make food for him, and I would take it like usually before 8 o'clock, right? Because that's the last evening prayer.
Did you ever leave the campus before the end of track practice? Did you ever...
No.
Okay.
No.
You're sure?
I want to say that I'm 99% sure.
Okay.
The reason why I can't say 100 is because, and I do kind of understand that it comes across as, I don't know if it does or doesn't, but it seems like I remember things that are beneficial to me, but things that aren't beneficial to me I can't remember. It's just that I don't really know what to say, beyond the fact that a lot of the days that I do remember, it's bits and pieces that comes from what other people have said, that they remember, right? Mm-hmm. And it kind of jogs my memory. Right? Yeah, I don't really know what to say, and I completely understand how that comes across. Yeah, the only thing I can say is, man, it was just a normal day to me. There was absolutely nothing abnormal about that day to me.
Adnan knows better than anyone how unhelpful this all is, how problematic, because it plays both ways. If he's innocent, right, it's any other day. Of course he doesn't remember. But you can also read it as, how convenient, he doesn't remember the day. So no one can fact-check him or poke holes in his story, because he has no story.
I definitely understand that someone could look at this and say, oh man, he must be lying. It's so coincidental that he doesn't remember what he did at this particular time. I completely understand that. And I get that. That's, like I said, that's the biggest, the hardest thing I've dealt with for these past 15 years is that there's nothing tangible I can do to remember that day. It's the truth. There's nothing I can do, to make me remember. I poured through the transcripts. I've looked through the telephone records. You know, I mean, it's just, what else can I do? There's nothing I can do, so it's you know, perhaps I'll never be able to explain it. And it is what it is. If someone believes me or not, you know, I have no control over it.
Adnan's trial was a long ordeal. Jay was on the stand for something like 5 days. A cell phone expert testified for 2 days, a lifetime when you're discussing cell tower technology. There were absences and some bad weather closed the courts, so it was 6 weeks before both sides rested. But the jury, they moved like lightning. After just a few hours, including a lunch break, they convicted Adnan of first-degree murder. Rabia Chowdhury was there in the courtroom when it happened. She says his mother was crying, she was crying. Rabia hadn't sat through the whole trial, so the first time she fully understood that the case came down to those 21 minutes was during closing arguments, when the prosecutor brought out a dummy's head and strangled it in front of the jury. That evening, after the verdict, Rabia went to see Adnan in lockup.
And so I went to go see him. So this is the same day he's been convicted. And this is the first time I actually had a conversation with him about, you know, what's going on. And I was like, you know, Adnan, the whole thing's turning on these 25 minutes. Like, you know, where were you? And he's like, look, she disappeared in January. You know, in March, you're asking me, like, where were you after school for 20 minutes on a specific day? Like, no, all the days are the same to me, you know.
But then he mentions that there was this one girl, an alibi girl.
He's like, the only thing I could offer is, he's like, I remember, he's like, there's a girl I go to school with who, her name's Asia McLean. He's like, right after I got arrested, she wrote me a couple of letters. And she said she also wanted to see my family. And she said she specifically remembers me being at the library, at the public library, right after school.
The Woodlawn Public Library is just across the parking lot from Woodlawn High School. It's not technically part of the campus, but it might as well be.
He said, I gave those letters to Christina Gutierrez, to my attorney. He's like, but, you know, apparently it didn't really check out. So he's like, I don't know. So they're not helpful to us. So this is the first time I heard of this girl, Asia McLean. I had never heard of her before. Nobody had mentioned her before.
Were you like floored? Like, wait, what? I mean, what, like...
I wasn't floored at the time because I thought if this girl wrote and the attorney, what criminal defense attorney is not going to check out a potential alibi? So I asked him, I said, do you have a copy of those letters? He said, yeah, I have a copy. I said, send me a copy.
Adnan sends the letters to Rabia, and here's what she reads. The first letter, the first of two, is dated March 1st, 1999. That is one day after Adnan was arrested. At the top of the letter, she notes, I just came from your house an hour ago. Dear Adnan, I hope I spelled it right. I'm not sure if you remember talking to me in the library on January 13th, but I remember chatting with you. She says, quote, we aren't really close friends, but I want you to look into my eyes and tell me of your innocence. If I ever find otherwise, I will hunt you down and whip your ass. Okay, friend? At the bottom, she added a little note. My boyfriend and his best friend remember seeing you there, too. That's letter number 1. Then the next day, on March 2nd, she writes Adnan another letter. This one's typed, it's chattier. She talks about the gossip in school, the bits and pieces of evidence about the crime that are circulating, what the students are saying, what the teachers are saying, about her visit to his house. Quote, your brothers are nice. I don't think I met your mother. I think I met your dad. Does he have a big gray beard? They gave me and Justin soda and cake. There's a whole bunch of people at your house. I didn't know who they were. I also didn't know that Muslims take their shoes off in the house. Thank God they didn't make me take mine off. My stinky feet probably would have knocked everyone out cold. Why haven't you told anyone about talking to me in the library? She asks him. Did you think it was unimportant? You didn't think that I would remember? Or did you just totally forget yourself? Adnan says now that he does, in fact, remember seeing Asia in the library. And the thing he remembers about it is so high school. Asia used to go out with Adnan's friend Justin, and Justin had confided that Asia was a proper young lady. In other words, Justin wasn't getting any. So Adnan remembers thinking he would now get to tease Justin about seeing Asia with her new boyfriend. Maybe the new guy was getting lucky. Ha ha. Anyway, Rabia calls Asia up. It's been a year since she wrote the letters, but she agrees to meet.
And she told me that day after school, I went to the public library. and Adnan was sitting at a computer checking email or something, and I sat down next to him and we started chatting. And Adnan was a very popular boy in school. He's handsome and, popular with the ladies. So she was speaking to him, and her boyfriend shows up a little bit later with a friend. And she said her boyfriend was really angry at her because he's like, why are you talking to him? As high school kids, why are you talking to him? Is he hitting on you? And she remembered very specifically that day she went to her boyfriend's house with him. And they got snowed in. And that snowed really heavily that night. And she remembered that for the following 2 days, school was closed. So she had very specific details about why she remembered that day.
Asia wrote out an affidavit on the spot. In it, she says she and Adnan spoke for about 15 to 20 minutes while she was waiting for her boyfriend to give her a ride. Quote, we left around 2:40, unquote. Remember, Hay is supposed to be dead by 2:36. And then the kicker. No attorney has ever contacted me about January 13th, 1999 and the above information. So, benefit of the doubt for a second. Maybe Adnan never actually showed the letters to Cristina Gutierrez, his attorney. Sure, he said he did, but who knows? Well, I know. Deep inside Gutierrez's notes on the case, I have boxes and boxes of such stuff. There's this in her handwriting. Asia plus boyfriend saw him in library, 2:15 to 3:15. Then there's another note, dated July 13th. It's more than 4 months after Adnan's arrest. This is written by one of Gutierrez's law clerks who visited Adnan in jail. Quote, Asia McClain saw him in the library at 3. Asia boyfriend saw him too. Library may have cameras. Why, oh why, was this person never heard from at trial? A solid, non-crazy, detail-oriented alibi witness in a case that so sorely needed alibi witnesses. I can't ask Cristina Gutierrez because she died in 2004. So I put that question to a few defense attorneys, and they said, well, alibi witnesses can be tricky, especially if it's just one person, because then it becomes one person's word over another. A single witness like that can backfire under cross-examination, or they might take the jury's focus away from the weaknesses in the state's case. So there are conceivable strategic reasons why Cristina Gutierrez might not have wanted to put Asia McClain on the stand. But what is inconceivable, they all said, is to not ever contact Asia McClain, to never make the call, never check it out, never find out if her story helps or hurts your case. That makes no sense whatsoever. That is not a strategy. That is a fuck-up. When I first heard about the long-lost Asia letters and the lawyer's mistake, I thought, well, their fight is over, right? They've got an alibi witness who was never heard from. It's such a slam dunk. They're done. Adnan's family hired a new attorney who filed a petition in court based on the Asia affidavit. His argument was that Adnan's trial could have turned out differently if Gutierrez had checked out Asia's story, and so Adnan should get some form of what's called post-conviction relief. The new lawyer figures he'll get Asia to come to the hearing. She'll vouch for her story. By this time, Asia had finished school and moved away. He finds an address on the West Coast, tries calling, sending messages, nothing. Finally, he writes a letter to her and gives it to a private investigator who goes out to Asia's house in hopes of delivering it. Asia's fiancé comes to the door, opens it part way, tells the investigator that she cannot speak to Asia, but that from what he knows of Adnan's case, Adnan is guilty and deserved the punishment he got. Later, the investigator gets a call from the fiancé. We don't have to talk to you. Leave us alone. So Adnan's lawyer calls off the search for Asia, figuring once a witness turns on you like that, it's too risky to keep pushing. And then at Adnan's hearing on the new petition, it comes out that Asia had done the very thing they dreaded. Asia had called one of the prosecutors in Adnan's case, a guy named Kevin Urich, and undermined her own statement. This is from a recording of the hearing. Mr. Urich is testifying on the witness stand.
Sir, how did you learn that the defendant had filed this petition?
A young lady named Asia called me.
And what did she say?
She was concerned because she was being asked questions about an affidavit she'd written back at the time of the trial. She told me that she'd only written it because she was getting pressure from the family, and she basically wrote it to please them and get them off her back.
I don't know what happened to her and why she would do this.
Here's Rabia again. She says it's not true that Asia was bullied into writing that statement 15 years ago. And she can't fathom why Asia would discredit her own statement like that.
I don't know why. The affidavit was written voluntarily. I mean, I'm an attorney. I'm a licensed attorney. I work on Homeland Security. I have no reason to make something like this up, you know? I didn't even know she existed until after the conviction.
So what do you think happened? Why would they have this sort of violent reaction to helping out Adnan now?
I don't know. It was just really odd.
So who knows what would have happened if Asia had shown up? Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. After all, they had the original letters and the affidavit. That's all that should have mattered. But it didn't look good. It'd be natural for the judge to wonder, why can't the defense produce this Asia person? Why is she making this call to a prosecutor? I mean, anyone would wonder. I wondered. I wondered if maybe she was pressured into writing that affidavit. And I wondered if she was hiding something. Like maybe she'd lied in those 1999 letters. Maybe she didn't really see Adnan at the library that day, and I just wanted to insert herself into something exciting. And maybe now that she was grown up, she wanted nothing to do with any of it. So 3-4 months after I'd first sat down with Rabia, I'd become fixated on finding Asia. I'm like a bloodhound on this thing, because the whole case seemed to me to be teetering on her memories of that afternoon. I have to know if Adnan really was in the library at 2:36 p.m., because if he was, well, library equals innocent. It's so maddeningly simple, and maybe I can crack it if I can just talk to Asia. I write her a long, gentle, pleading letter and send it off to an address I find online. I'm calling people who know her or who I think might know her. I'm checking the same loop of Facebook, My Life, LinkedIn sites over and over, trawling for clues about where she might be or how she might think. If you're wondering why I went so nuts on this story versus some other murder case, the best I can explain is this is the one that came to me. It wasn't halfway across the world or even next door. It came right to my lap. And if I could help get to the bottom of it, shouldn't I try? I start running down all the other information in Asia's 1999 letters. She mentioned there were security cameras inside the library. So my producer and I went to see the very nice manager there, Michelle Hamil. Was there a security system back in '99 that could have been checked at the time?
Probably. Yes. I'm going to say yes.
Okay. And what system was it?
I have no idea. It was a old system.
Yeah.
So,
But you think probably video?
it was video.
Okay.
Mhm. And that was part of setup. Every morning you put a videotape in. So that's,
And were you guys recycling the videotapes?
yes.
Okay.
I think it ran for, a week. So you had a Monday tape, a Tuesday tape, a Wednesday tape, and so forth.
So even if on the very day that Asia had written her first letter, Adnan's lawyer had run out to find the security tape, it probably would have been non-existent by then. But what about the computer Adnan was supposedly using to check his email?
To use the computer, did people have to sign in, like write their name down?
They did.
And what was the system then?
Piece of paper and pencil.
And those, by any chance, weren't logged meticulously and kept for 15 years, were they?
No.
Bummer. All right. We got nothing.
Then there was the mystery of Asia's boyfriend Derek and his friend Gerard. All winter and spring, every time I went to Baltimore, I went to Derek's mom's house looking for him, and to Gerard's window tinting business. And then finally...
All right, so you are Gerard Johnson.
Yes, I am.
You don't know how excited we are to be talking to you. I've been looking for you for like 4 months. You didn't do anything, but we were hoping maybe you remembered this moment. On January 13th, 1999, do you have any memory, by any miracle, that you went to Woodlawn Public Library branch near Woodlawn High School to pick up Asia McClain with your friend Derek?
I have no idea. Asia McClain. Is that a person or a book?
It's a person.
No recollection of it.
Scratch Gerard. Derek was my last hope. Eventually, I caught him at home. Considering I woke him up, he was exceedingly courteous. He showed me a photo of Asia and him all dressed up. They dated most of senior year.
What's up here?
This is our senior prom. Yeah.
You guys both look really beautiful.
Yeah. That's my, that's Asia. Yeah.
But Derek couldn't remember that day either. Shocking, I know. He used to pick Asia up from school almost every day back then, either from the library or from the front of the school. And he says he spoke to a lot of her friends, just to be polite.
And it's very possible that I could have spoken to the gentleman and her on that day. But it's very hard to remember, 15 years later. But it sounds, very, it sounds like this definitely could have happened. Yeah, I don't think Asia's not the type of person that would lie just to,
That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, she's definitely not that type of person, to get involved with a lie, that she's not that type of person. So she, it seemed pretty credible to me.
One day, I get a call on my cell phone from a blocked number. You guessed it, Asia. I wish I could say that my charming, persuasive letter is what prompted Asia to call, but the truth is she never got my letter. I had the wrong address. But she was calling because I'd followed up weeks later with a one-line email, and she was responding to that, a little confused.
This is crazy. I have a couple minutes if you want to chat about it.
I recorded our conversation on the cell, which is why the sound quality is so bad. Sorry about that. Asia is now a 33-year-old stay-at-home mother, and she has not spent the last 15 years worrying about Adnan and whether he's guilty.
I trust the court systems to do their due diligence, and I was never questioned, I was never informed of anything pertaining to the case. I don't know why he was convicted.
Asia said she was spooked when the private investigator came to her house. I don't know if that's why she didn't testify at the hearing or why she made the call to the prosecutor, but she told me that when she got the knock at the door, quote, that was not cool. Because to her, if Adnan did do it, quote, the last thing you want is a murderer being pissed off at you, knowing where you live. But she had a remarkably clear memory of what happened on January 13th, 1999. She had an internship at the time, and so she got out of school much earlier than everyone else. Derek was supposed to come get her at the library along with Gerard, but they were very late. She remembers seeing Adnan come in after Woodlawn let out for the day.
Adnan came in, he sat at the table, and, we weren't, really close friends or anything like that, but, we knew each other, and, he chatted or whatever, and I can't remember. I think I must have asked him how he was doing or whatever, and he said fine, and, he told me that him and Hay had broke up, and I was like, oh, well, that's a bummer, and I was like, what happened? And he was like, oh, well, she is seeing this other guy, some white dude, and, but he was pretty chill about it. He was just like, well, if, she doesn't want to be with me, then that's fine. I just wish the best for her, and that kind of attitude. And
I'm not sure why Asia's memory of this interaction is so clear all these years later. My best guess is that because she wrote it down at the time, in those letters and then the affidavit, that the details somehow stuck.
Do you remember what time you were talking this would have happened in the library? Do you remember what time that conversation would have happened?
I don't, because I know school let out around 2:15, so it was probably around
Because you had said you got out of school earlier than other people. So were you there? Were you at the library before 2:15?
Oh, yeah. I had been at the library for a few hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was pretty pissed when Derek showed up. And you know, and he asked me who Adnan was, and, you know, Joe's teenager boy language. He's like, who the hell is that?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, don't even start with me, because you're a few hours late. Don't worry about who that is, I remember that day because that was the day that it snowed.
Were there snow days after that? Do you remember?
I want to say there was, because I think that was like the first snow of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have even remembered if it hadn't have been for the snow and the whole, I just remember being so pissed about Derek being late and then getting snowed in at his house, and it was the first snow of that year.
The snow is important. Hay disappeared on a Wednesday. That night there was a huge ice storm, which is unusual in Maryland. It ended up being a state emergency, and school was closed for the rest of the week. Asia started asking me questions about the case. Wasn't there DNA evidence? And what exactly was Jay's part in the whole thing? She wasn't sure Adnan was guilty. She said things I've now heard from so many people since. He seemed like he cared about Hay. He didn't seem angry or upset. I thought there was more proof.
Even that day, it did, I didn't walk away thinking like, oh, I just started something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you want to base his innocence off of his composure at that moment, I would say he's innocent, but, I mean, I'm 32 years old now, and I know that, there's people out there capable of heinous acts that can keep a calm demeanor,
Yeah.
And I know that there are people who flip out on a moment's notice and do something that, they regret for the rest of their lives. So I don't really...
Yeah.
Even now, it would be nice if there was some technicality, something that would prove his innocence. Great, one less evil person I've met in my life.
But I think Asia, like, you might be that technicality. Do you see what I mean? Like, if you're saying you saw him on this day at that time, that means the state's timeline for their whole theory of the case doesn't make any sense.
It's a possibility.
Because they're saying he was in the car with her at the very time that you're saying, no, I saw him at the library and we were talking. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's exactly the window where they're saying she was murdered.
In case you couldn't hear that, it was a sigh, and I completely understand that sigh. It's how I feel a lot of the time. Because I talk to Adnan regularly, and he just doesn't seem like a murderer. A few minutes after I hung up with Asia, Adnan called, on schedule.
Hey, sir. How you doing?
I'm good. So I was just talking to Asia McClain.
Okay.
You don't sound very excited.
Well, I mean, I really,
This was not the reaction I expected. I felt like I'd just interviewed an ivory-billed woodpecker. But when I told Adnan what Asia remembered, instead of being excited, Adnan said it was heartbreaking.
I mean, on a personal level, I'm happy because, in a sense, it's, that I'm not making this up. And at least, if nothing else, it kind of like, at least someone other than Rabia knows that, this did take place. Anything that can kind of support what I'm saying to be the truth, that I didn't do this, is great. But from a legal perspective, it's like, I wish she would have came to the realization maybe like a year and a half ago. You know what I mean? Because it's kind of like, you know, it's too late. I'm sorry. I mean, I definitely appreciate it, you know, and I definitely kind of hear the elation in your voice, and I feel like I punctured your balloon.
No. I mean, I see what you're saying. I hadn't thought about it in that way.
When I told Robbie I'd talked to Asia, she immediately burst into tears. Because they were all correct. It was too late. The judge ruled on Adnan's petition a few weeks before I spoke to Asia. Denied. The judge wrote in his opinion that Cristina Gutierrez's decision not to use Asia McClain as an alibi witness was strategic. After all, Asia's original letters didn't specify an exact time, and Gutierrez could have reasonably concluded that Asia was offering to lie in order to help Adnan. And finally, he wrote, Asia's letter contradicted Adnan's own alibi. Asia says she saw him at the public library, but Adnan said he was on the school campus the whole afternoon. Maybe the judge didn't understand that Woodlawn Library is basically part of the campus. But anyway. Asia's story, then, is legally worthless. A witness who says she saw you at the exact moment when the state contends you were strangling a young woman in a car is worthless. A few days after I spoke to Asia, she wrote me an email. I've been thinking a lot about Adnan, she wrote. All this time I thought the courts proved it was Adnan that killed her. I thought he was where he deserved to be. Now I'm not so sure. Hay was our friend too, and it sucks feeling like you don't know who really killed your friend. Hay was the sweetest person ever. If he didn't kill Hay, we owe it to him to try to make that clear. And if he did kill her, then we need to put this to rest. I just hope that Adnan isn't some sick bastard just trying to manipulate his way out of jail. I wrote back, believe me, I am on exactly the same page. Coming up this season on Serial.
I think that there are other people involved. Like maybe he was set up. I think he was set up somehow.
Clearly, you could tell something was going on that wasn't good. I mean, it was just strange behavior for anybody.
Basically threatened me, like, you know what happened to Hay, this is what's going to happen to you. That's how I felt that day.
What are you thinking right now? You have the same smile I do.
I'm literally thinking, could he have gone crazy?
Jay told me he was being blackmailed by Adnan. Because Adnan knew that Jay couldn't go to the police.
Like, if this works, and every question we've had for the past 8 months, he knows it.
Yeah, I mean, who else did it? You know, there's run out of suspects.
Serial is produced by Julie Snyder, Dana Chivas, and me. Emily Condon is our production and operations manager. Ira Glass is our editorial advisor. Editing help from Nancy Updike. Fact-checking by Karen Fergala-Smith. Special thanks to Lou Teddy, Jane Marie, Seth Lind, Elise Bergerson, and the entire staff of This American Life. And to my in-laws, Ethan Schreier and Janet Levine, for putting me up in Baltimore so many times in the past year. Serial is a production of This American Life and WBEZ Chicago.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us what you know about the death of Haley?
Previously on Serial.
So he wanted an alibi?
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I can say is, man, it was just a normal day to me. There was absolutely nothing abnormal about that day to me.
She was concerned because she was being asked questions about an affidavit she'd written.
Even now, it would be nice if there was some technicality, something that would prove his innocence. Great.
But I think, Asia, like, you might be that technicality.
This is a Global Cal-Link prepaid call from
Adnan Syed,
an inmate at
From This American Life and WBEZ Chicago, it's Serial. One story told week by week. I'm Sarah Koenig. We're at episode 2. You probably heard episode 1 on This American Life or through our website, serialpodcast.org. But if you haven't, stop. Go back to the beginning. We're telling this story in order, the story of Hae Min Lee, an 18-year-old girl who was killed in Baltimore in 1999, and the story of Adnan Syed, her ex-boyfriend who was convicted of the crime. So to pick up where we left off, last episode you heard how the prosecution told the story of this murder at Adnan's trial. And the motive the state supplied, the basis for the whole thing, was that after Hae broke up with Adnan, he couldn't accept it. He was so wounded by her and so furious that he decided to kill her. Prosecutor Kevin Urich told the jury in his opening statement, quote, "He became enraged. He felt betrayed that his honor had been besmirched, and he became very angry, and he set out to kill Hae Min Lee." Or, this is from closing, quote, "It was humiliating what she did to him. Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, this was not a crime about love. This was a crime about pride." But is that what their relationship and breakup were really like? Was he so hurt that he decided to kill her? That's what I'm trying to find out in today's episode, by talking to lots of people who knew Hae and Adnan, mostly their friends, because they were a close-knit group. Some of them had known each other since elementary school, and even though they went to a big, tough high school, Hae and Adnan and their friends were clumped together in a magnet program of about 30 kids, kind of school within the school, and they all took classes together and hung out together, and they dated each other, so they knew each other well. And the other information I have to go on are Hae's own words about their relationship, because I have a copy of her diary. It was entered into evidence at trial, was read by many people, cops, prosecutors, even Adnan. What's remarkable about the diary and what makes it so helpful is that it's essentially a chronicle of the Adnan era of Hae's life. The first entry is April 1st, 1998, right when they started going out. And the last entry is dated January 12th, the day before she went missing. And in all those months, what she's mostly writing about is Adnan. If you had to bookend Hae and Adnan's romance, you'd put a school dance right at the beginning and then another one right at the end. The first dance was junior prom. Adnan and his best friend had a little competition going about who could get the prettiest prom date that year. Someone said Adnan should ask Hae to go, so one day after sports practice on the little hill behind the school, he asked her to prom, and she said yes. On April 27th, she wrote a long entry in her diary about prom night. Her diary, by the way, well, I'm not exactly sure what I expected her diary to be like, but it's such a teenage girl's diary. She jumps from her boyfriend to driver's ed to the field hockey game. She's bubbly one minute, and the next she's upset with her mother or dissing her friend or complaining about homework. So, prom night. She writes about Adnan. Quote, "I swear he is the sweetest guy. Let me tell you why. He was prom prince, and Stephanie was prom princess, and traditionally they were supposed to dance together to my song, Casey and JoJo's All My Life. I tried to act natural and unjealous, but it did kind of bother me. 10 seconds later, guess who danced with me and not with Stephanie? Adnan. Now, how could I not fall in love with this guy? Of course, I gave him his first kiss on the lips. Then I totally fell in love with him. Since then, I keep on falling deeper and deeper."
And I will, make fun of her about it.
That's Aisha Pittman. She was in the magnet program, too. Hae was her best friend.
She would, show me notes that they shared, and then it just progressed from there. But it was a relationship that was constantly secret because neither of their families knew about it, so that just created much more of her saying, "I'm going to be at your house, but really I'm going out with him," kind of thing.
She would tell her parents she was at your place.
Yeah. Or others. Primarily mine, though. Just a lot of that sort of secrecy around it.
We had a lot of real similar types of situations with our families.
That's Adnan. Since he and Hae both had immigrant parents, they understood the expectations and the constraints. Do well in school, go to college, take care of your younger brother. And for Adnan, no girls. If a female friend rode in his car, for instance, she'd have to make sure not to leave any long hairs behind. Or if a girl gave Adnan a ride home, she'd have to drop him off down the block so his parents wouldn't see who was at the wheel.
You know, it was really easy to date someone that kind of lived within the same parameters that I did with regards to, you know, she didn't have an expectation of me coming to her house for dinner with her family. You know, she understood that, you know, that if she was to call my house and, you know, speak to my mother or father, I would get in trouble, and vice versa. You know, so we would have to kind of set up our talks on the phone. Usually we would talk late at night when our parents were sleeping.
They had a whole system for this. One would page the other when the coast was clear. Remember, it's 1998, so not many cell phones around. Then that person would call some 1-800 service, like the weather or the time, and the other one would call in so that the phone wouldn't actually ring. It would come in through call waiting, and the dozing parents would never be the wiser. At the trial, the state tried to paint a picture of Adnan as possessive of Hae, as controlling. When I spoke to Hae's closest friends about that, a couple of them did say that he seemed to be over-involved with her somehow, though they couldn't come up with many examples. Two people remembered a time when Adnan showed up uninvited to a girls' trip to an amusement park. Aisha Pittman was one of them. She remembers nothing positive about their relationship anymore, though by her own admission, she doesn't know whether her memories are colored by what came later.
I think it was probably mostly normal, but things that, like, he kind of just always generally annoyed me because just the constant paging her if she was out. He's like, well, I just wanted to know where you were. And it's like, I told you where I was going to be. If she was at my house and we were having a girls' night, he would stop by, like he would walk over and try to come hang out. And it's just like, have some space. And it's one of those things, at first, it's like, oh, it's so cute, your boyfriend's dropping by. But then the 10th time, it's like, really?
Did Hae ever seem freaked out by it?
No, but I don't think I was ever freaked out by it in the moment.
Here's Hae's take on one of those impromptu visits Aisha's talking about. On July 16th, she writes, quote, Adnan dropped by Isha's late with carrot cake. So, yeah, Hae does not describe Adnan as overbearing or possessive in her diary. Though she does mention a couple of moments when she's mad at him, like, quote, how dare you get mad at me for planning to hang with Isha? Or a time when he was nasty to her because she didn't respond to his messages fast enough. But mostly these incidents seem to be tit for tat. Quote, I'm in a real bitch attitude and Adnan is not helping, she writes on June 15th. He hasn't called me since 12:30 this afternoon, and it's definitely pushing me to the edge. I think I'm going to pick a fight, unquote. Hae's friends say she had a strong personality and strong opinions. She was no pushover. When she was pissed at Adnan, she let him know. But by far, the majority of her diary entries are about how much she likes and loves him. I stopped counting. There were so many wonderfuls and sweetest and best boyfriend in the world. Mostly, I heard stuff like this from their friends. Here's Becky Klein. Back then, she was Becky Walker.
It's just a silly teenage high school relationship. I remember a lot of teasing and a lot of, hand-holding, arms around each other. I don't really remember anything weird or anything that stands out.
They hung around all that summer before senior year. They'd meet up after work and drive around. They were 17, they were in love, they were active. They'd have sex whenever and wherever possible, sometimes at motels or in the car or at a park or at other people's houses or apartments. Sometimes they'd fight and then they'd quickly make up. A couple of times Hae called it off, but then would ask for Adnan back after a day or 2 or 3. Remember, the setup for this crime that the state laid out was that Adnan was betraying everything he held dear for this girl. As a good Muslim, he was not supposed to be dating, and so he was sacrificing his religion and lying to his family, all just so he could be with her, and it twisted him up inside. And Hae's diary seems to be where they found some evidence for that. In fact, they had a friend of Hae's, Debbie Warren, read excerpts from it on the witness stand. Quote, I like him. No, I love him, she read at trial. It's dated May 15th. Quote, it's just all the things that stand in the middle. His religion and Muslim customs are the main thing. It irks me to know that I'm against his religion. He called me a devil a few times. I know he was only joking. It's somewhat true. And then there's this, which wasn't read at trial, but is from July when Adnan went to an Islamic conference in Texas with his dad. This is the most distressed Hay gets on the topic. When I read it, I thought, whoa, this does not look so good for Adnan. Quote, I keep crying over the phone because I miss him so much, she writes. He told me that his religion means life to him. He tried to remain a faithful Muslim all his life, but he fell in love with me, which is a great sin. But he told me there is no way he'll ever leave me because he can't imagine a life without me. Then he said that one day he would have to choose between me and his religion. I love him so much, and when it comes to choosing, I'm going to let him go his way. I hate the fact that I'm the cause of his sin. He said that I shouldn't feel like I'm pulling him away from his religion, but hello, that's exactly what I'm doing. So, yeah, anytime someone's writing stuff down like sin and devil and religion means life in reference to their secret relationship, that's not good. But ask the Muslim in question about it, and it all sounds so much smaller.
I may have said it as a joke. Like, oh, man, hey, I can't, I'm going to hell because I'm dating you or something. But I never meant it in the type of way that it seems that she took it.
Adnan claims he just wasn't that religious. He was going to clubs and having sex with girls and smoking weed from the time he was 14 or 15. Culturally, yes, a Muslim, but the rest, he says, not so much. So passages like this, he says he doesn't really recognize himself in them.
I never really felt as if, man, hey, it's tearing me away from my religion. And I never, only till I read her diary that I really kind of understood that, wow, this is the perception that she kind of had. Just like the gravity and the magnitude with which she took these things, I didn't really feel that way about these things. Maybe it seems convenient for me to say that now, but the only thing that I can say to kind of, I won't say prove it in a way, is that my behavior didn't change once I stopped, once Hay broke up with me, or once, we broke up or whatever. It's not like, all of a sudden I'm like, okay, this whole big sin is out of my life. No, it just, I just continued with the same type of behavior. It was just different people.
Religious stuff aside, the state said Adnan was guilt-ridden over lying to his family about Hay. But he says he wasn't all that bothered by that. He figured he was a pretty good kid. He was doing well in school, he had a job, he was volunteering at the mosque. Why shouldn't he have some fun? And in the pantheon of ways a teenager could have been disrespectful or deceitful to his parents, he thought this rated pretty low.
Yeah, my name is Shamim Rahman, and I'm the mother of Adnan Syed.
Adnan did most of his lying to his mother. She figured out something was up pretty early on. She'd found Adnan's crown from prom in the basement where he tried to stash it, along with his tux. Shamim came to the United States in 1976. Her husband was already here working as an engineer for the state of Maryland. She's from Peshawar in Pakistan, where you do not date. You are either married or unmarried. There's not much of a middle ground. So Adnan's girl contact put Shamim in a state of high alert. She would check the mileage on his car to see if he'd driven farther than he said. She eavesdropped when he talked to girls on the phone. I know this makes Shamim sound terrifying, but she's not at all. She adores Adnan, her middle son.
Yeah, he will talk to the girls, yes. I will pick up the phone or I'll.
And would he know? Would he say, like, Mom, hang up the phone?
Yeah, he'll say, Mom, I know you're listening to me. Yes, I say, Adnan, I'm here. You say, Mom, stop listening to us,
Yeah. And was that conflict, it must have been sort of constant.
Of course, yeah, because for me it was unacceptable. Yeah. So we used to argue a lot. I say, no, you cannot do that. You cannot. If you like somebody, it's all right, you can get married, but not without marriage, you cannot. Of course, me and Adnan had a problem.
Adnan's father was a little more loose about
it? My whole family was loose. Even my older son, he say, Mom, everybody's doing it. Even my husband say, that all the boys are doing it. But I say, no, not my children.
Adnan wasn't getting punished for any of this. It wasn't as if he were about to get kicked out of the house. More like he was being reminded of his responsibilities, both at home and at his mother's request by his youth leader at the mosque. Then came the homecoming dance in the fall of senior year. Adnan and Hay had been together for about 7 months by then. This dance would become a big deal at trial, proof of just how fraught their whole relationship was and how tormented Adnan was about his double life. Here's what happened. Adnan's parents got wind that very night that he had taken Hay to homecoming. Adnan says this kind of thing happens in their community all the time. Someone sees someone else's kid at a dance or at the mall, and before you can even hide behind a potted plant, 4 aunties are on the phone to the kid's mother. Anyway, this time, Adnan's parents did not wait to deal with it at home. They showed up at the dance and chastised him, made a scene. The prosecutors argued that this scene would come to haunt him until the day he killed Hay. Here's what prosecutor Casey Murphy told the jury about the moment when she says Adnan strangled Hay. What is it that this defendant saw on January 13th when he looked down at Hae Lee? And she lists a couple things and says this, quote, he saw his parents standing at the window of the homecoming dance. He saw his mother raise her voice at Hae Lee in front of his classmates. Look what you're doing to our family. He saw the pain in his mother's face because she knew they were together. And he saw himself, in the end, standing there with nothing to show for it but a guilty conscience and a pack of lies in which he cloaked himself. Now, compare that with how Adnan's best friend Saad remembers the homecoming debacle.
He comes home at like 11 p.m. or like 12 midnight, and I'm like, what happened at your homecoming? And he's like, you're not going to believe this. I'm like, what? He's like, my mom and my dad showed up. And I'm like, what? And I mean, we're dying laughing on the phone about this. Just this is our world. And I'm like, what happened? They're like, they showed up. They made me leave. And everyone saw it. How literally my parents pulled me out of this relationship.
I've come across dozens of bits of evidence like this. Information that can either mean one thing or perhaps its opposite, depending on who's talking. Adnan's cell phone, for example. He bought it just 2 days before Hay disappeared. The state tried to show that that was all part of his plan, that he needed the phone to carry out the murder. But Adnan says he wanted the phone so he could call girls unfettered. And he was proud of the phone. He'd worked hard at his job as an EMT to pay for it. Oh, and the job. The state would argue that because he was an EMT, Adnan would have known how to strangle someone and would have had the training to revive them if he'd wished. Adnan, again, he says he was proud of being certified. He'd gotten the highest score on the qualifying test of anyone in his class and a real job as a result. He liked old people, and his job was mostly to ride in the back of the ambulance with old people to make sure they were okay. In the detective's notes, they interview Adnan's English teacher, Jane Ephron, who apparently tells them, quote, Adnan had a dark side, which is in his poetry. The words dark side are underlined. And Miss Ephron?
It was like all the teenagers that I taught, because everything in their lives was dark. I don't remember any of them having anything upbeat to say. So he was just another one that makes you think that you're living on another planet. Because you look out at them and they're all healthy and hearty and playing and being stupid.
So it didn't stick out in some way. It was just like all teenagers write broody, dramatic poetry.
Absolutely.
See what I mean? All this information, every scrap, it's currency for whatever side you're on. It's spin. And the trouble with spin is that you can't totally disregard it, because swirling around somewhere inside, some tendril of it is true. Saad Chowdhury thinks Adnan is innocent, so for him, the homecoming story is also innocent. Hay didn't write about homecoming in her diary, but Aisha says it wasn't funny to her. It was a big deal. Aisha remembers Adnan's parents wanting to find Hay so they could talk to her, which of course Hay wanted nothing to do with.
So that we could leave the dance and not be harassed by his parents. Like, she walked out holding hands with my friend Sean to get away from it, and she just felt like that was a completely ridiculous thing. And she was super pissed, wanting to have... I think that for her was I absolutely don't want to be with this person at all, because this is what happens.
On November 3rd, Hay wrote in her diary, quote, "Who would have thought we would end like this? Who would have imagined the amount of pain that comes with a broken heart? I know I'm doing the right thing. Call me selfish, but this pain is way less than what it would be if we stayed together." Then, apparently they reunited because exactly a month later, on December 3rd, she's full of love for Adnan again. Quote, "This feels so real, so loving, and ever so amazing. I can't be any happier, but yet I keep on being happier." But then, just 3 days later, there's this on December 6th. Quote, "What's the matter with me? Every time I close my eyes, I see my baby, but I keep on thinking about someone else. Don." Hay has got a crush on Don, an older guy, he's 20, whom she works with at Lens Crafters at the Owings Mills Mall. Don has blue eyes and blonde hair and a Camaro, and she really, really likes him. For the next couple of weeks, she's racked with guilt and confusion over what to do. At one point, she writes Adnan's name in giant block letters made out of tiny little Adnans, and underneath that does the same thing with Don in giant letters made up of tiny Dons. On another page, she writes Don's name 127 times. 127 Dons. It's not clear from the diary when she finally tells Adnan it's over, but certainly by Christmas they were split. On New Year's Day, Hay has her first official date with Don, and they start going out. Hay is head over heels. Aisha remembers meeting him on a double date to Friday's restaurant, and then to see the movie Shakespeare in Love.
It was the most awkward double date in the world because he was older. I forget how old he was, but he was significantly older than us, and my boyfriend was 2 years younger, so it was just a horrible double date.
Like you were out with one man and one boy?
Yeah. It did.
This is where the real questions begin. All the most important questions about Adnan. About how he responded to this breakup and to the fact of Hay's new boyfriend. Because the whole premise of the state's case against Adnan is that he felt betrayed and humiliated and angry, and that's why he killed her. This idea came from Jay, their main witness. It was Jay who supplied the motive to police. Here's tape of Jay being interviewed by Detective Greg McGillivray.
What did he tell you?
He told me that she had broke his heart. It was extremely wrong for anyone to treat him that way. That he couldn't believe how she stood and looked him face to face and told him she didn't love him and could be that heartless. And he told me, he said, almost jokingly, "I think I'm going to kill her." Yeah, I'm thinking I'm going to kill her.
You didn't know how he was going to kill her.
No.
But he told you that he was going to kill her.
Yes.
Because she had broken his heart.
Yes.
But nearly everyone I spoke with, Adnan's friends and teachers, say he took the breakup like anyone would. Adnan's friend Mac Francis said Adnan was initially devastated and jealous about the new boyfriend, that he grumbled about it in a typical guy way, nothing strange. Everyone I talked to said some version of this, that he wasn't rage-filled or vindictive, he was just sad.
It really did seem like run-of-the-mill, mundane, teenage angst.
That's Donna Paoletti Phillips. She taught Adnan and Hay AP Psychology, and had known them both since they were freshmen. In her job, she's seen a lot of high school breakups.
But the level of frustration he must have felt if he killed her doesn't register with me. I don't remember getting that vibe from him. He was just another kid whose heart was broken. And goodness, if I thought that the kids I teach today were going to resort to some kind of horrific crime based on that kind of thing, I would have stopped teaching. Because it happens
every other day.
It would be.
Adnan's friend Saad said Adnan definitely wasn't mooning over Hay.
When they had broke up, Adnan and Hay had broke up, it'd been like a month, maybe more. She had already started dating another guy, and I was like, Adnan's dating multiple girls. I was like, I can tell you some of the girls that he's dating. I was like, he is not upset about him and Hay breaking up. I was like, he's dating this girl, Anjali, in Philly that he's been going to see. This girl. And I know it wasn't like great proof, but it was still proof that he wasn't obsessed with Hay. He wasn't. I was like, I'm trying to explain. I'm 17. I'm like, he's a player. He has a lot of girls. I was like, he's talking to multiple. I was like, I am too.
He was cute and charming. He was just a very sweet guy. Very flirtatious.
Sorry, Saad, she's not talking about you. This is Anjali, the girl in Philly. And she confirmed, yep, a couple of visits, they made out, nothing too serious. On New Year's Eve, Adnan met another girl, Nisha, from Silver Spring, Maryland, and he started calling her a lot, too. Adnan's friend Mac remembered Adnan making out with another friend of theirs at a party that January. So yeah, a player. Adnan himself describes the breakups with Hay as fairly rational events.
Each time that we broke up, or each time that she ended the relationship or took a break, it was never a thing where I was like pestering her or like going to her house, knocking on the door or chasing her down. Look, I want to get back with you. I want to get back with you, because of a part, there was a part of me that knew that, man, what she's saying, it makes sense. So, yeah, so pretty much that we were just friends, we would talk about things like she would tell me about someone that she had met at her job, a guy named Don, and she was like, she really liked him, and
You have 30 seconds remaining.
Can I call you back, or?
Yeah, call me back. That's the prison phone system telling us our time is up. This happens every half hour. Surprises me every time, because I often sort of forget where he is. But so you're making the breakups sound very kind of calm and mutual and like nobody got upset. But I mean, is that true, or was there like crying and the usual teenage angst over it?
Well, mind you now, this is me talking, 15 years later. I mean, she was upset. I was upset. It was times where I was very sad. And maybe I would kind of be like a little stubborn about it. Like, no, we can make it work. Our parents will be cool or whatever. But on the other hand, there was never a thing where I was like, screaming and yelling at her, why are you leaving me? Or so, just to say that, just to kind of dispel that was never my behavior, at all.
It is true that no one at the time described Adnan as acting obsessed or menacing in any way, not even Aisha. And in her diary, Hay never expresses any concerns about Adnan's post-breakup behavior. In fact, she writes about a time just before Christmas, so after they'd broken up, when she gets into a little car accident and calls up Adnan to come get her from work. Both Dawn, her new crush, and Adnan look at the car together and decide it's unsafe to drive, so Adnan takes her home. Apparently it was all very cordial. Even Don said so. He wouldn't talk to me for this story, but he testified at the trial. At this point, I'm going to say flat out that I don't buy the motive for this murder, at least not how the state explained it. I just don't see it. Not one person says he was acting strangely after they broke up. He and Hay, again, by all accounts, were still friends. He was interested in other girls. He was working at his job. He was headed to college. About 2 weeks after his arrest, he gets an orientation packet from the University of Maryland. I don't think he was some empty shell of a kid who'd betrayed his family and his religion and was now left with nothing and conjured up a murderous rage for a girl who broke his heart. I simply don't buy it. And the reason I don't buy it is because no one who knew him, then or now, says that's how it was. I want to be clear, though, that doesn't mean he didn't do it. It just means that so far, I think the state's story about why he killed her doesn't hold up. Maybe it was more of a spur-of-the-moment thing. Maybe despite the other girls he was running after, he was privately stewing about Hay. After all, she was apparently still flirting with him after they broke up, still paging him with loving messages. She bought him an expensive jacket that Christmas. Maybe he thought he still had a chance with her. Like their friend Debbie told me, maybe once Don came on the scene, he thought, that's a slap in the face. How dare you continue to lead me on like this? The night before Hay disappeared, Adnan called her from his cell phone 3 times. The first 2 calls at 11:27 p.m. and 12:01 a.m. were only 2 seconds each. The third call at 12:35 a.m. lasted 1 minute and 24 seconds. Adnan says he was probably calling to give her his new cell phone number. He'd just gotten the phone the day before. And indeed, in the top left corner of her diary, she'd written down the number. According to Don's testimony, she'd been at his house that night, which is probably why Adnan's first 2 calls ended so fast. She probably wasn't home yet. Her very last diary entry, dated January 12th, is brief. I love you, Don. I think I have found my soulmate. I love you so much. I fell in love with you the moment I opened my eyes to see you in the break room for the first time. There is one detail about the day Hay went missing that I need to tell you about, a detail that doesn't look good for Adnan. And that detail has to do with whether Adnan tried to get in Hay's car right after school. Because that is what the state would allege, that Adnan fabricated a reason to get in her car that afternoon, so he could kill her. Jay had told police that was Adnan's plan.
Does he tell you how he's going to do it that day?
No, but he tells me that he's going to do it in her car. He said to me that he was going to tell her his car was broken down and ask her for a ride.
So what do we know about the end of that day, a Wednesday, January 13th? Hay and Adnan had a couple classes together, first period, and also last period, AP Psychology with Miss Paoletti. That's when Aisha last saw Hay, at the end of psychology. She was talking to Adnan. Then their friend Debbie remembers seeing Hay on her way to her car. She told Debbie she had to get her cousin from school and then was going to see Don at the mall. The very last person to see Hay at school that day, we think, is Inez Butler Hendricks. Inez ran a little concession stand right at the gym entrance, and Hay would come by every day and get the same thing, a very fine apple juice and hot fries. That day, she drove up in front of the gym where the concession stand was and left her car running.
So she came around the circle, parked her car right there, jumped out, and ran in to get something to drink and to tell the bus not to leave her.
The bus was for the boys' wrestling team. Hay was manager, and they had a match later that afternoon that Hay was supposed to go to.
And you didn't see her again after that?
No, I didn't see her anymore.
And was Adnan anywhere near her car?
No, I didn't see him near the car.
Okay, so no one actually testified at trial that they saw Hay and Adnan leave school together. And no one, aside from Jay, says they spotted Adnan in her car at any time that afternoon. Adnan has no recollection of having asked Hay for a ride anywhere. We've talked about it many times. Here's what he said the very first time I asked him.
I wouldn't have asked her for a ride after school. I'm sure that I didn't ask her because, well, immediately after school, because I know she always, anyone who knows her knows, she always goes to pick up her little cousin. So she's not doing anything for anyone right after school. No matter what it was, not a trip to McDonald's, not a trip to 7-Eleven. She took that very seriously.
The trouble for Adnan is that a couple of their friends say he did ask Hay for a ride. One of them was her friend Krista.
If I remember correctly, I think Adnan and I were had a class together. Our first period class was photography, and they passed each other in the hallway, and I was with him, and I remember somebody saying, or him saying something about, can you give me a ride after school?
Their friend Becky told police she heard something about a ride as well.
I do remember that there was talk about it. I felt like he asked her to give him a ride somewhere.
Okay. Can I just read to you what the police notes say? I think April 9th, 99, they interviewed you.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, sometime earlier that day, apparently he asked her to take him possibly to get car before lunch because it was in the shop. Heard about it at lunch. So it's, I think you heard about it at lunch.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Hayes said she could. There would be no problem. At end of school, I saw them. She said, "Oh, no, I can't take you. I have something else to do." She didn't say what else. Approximately 2:20. So that happened at approximately 2:20. He said, "Okay, I'll just ask someone else." He told her goodbye. And then just says, "Did not see Hay after that."
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right. It kind of all comes back a little bit.
So Krista and Becky both remembered, and while Becky's recollection maybe works in Adnan's favor, that Hay turned him down for a ride and he seemed cool with that, the question is still there. Was he trying to get in her car? Did he ask for a ride, just like Jay said? And in fact, the most damning evidence in support of Jay's statement doesn't even come from Krista or Becky. It comes directly from Adnan, because he himself told the cops the same thing that day.
This time the state would call police officer Scott Adcock to the stand.
Around 6:30 p.m., after Hay had gone missing, a Baltimore County police officer named Scott Adcock called Adnan's cell phone. Hay's family was worried that she hadn't turned up to her cousin's school, and the officer was calling around to some of her friends to see if they knew where she was. Here's Adcock testifying at trial.
I spoke to Mr. Syed, and he advised me that he did see the victim in school that day, and that he was supposed to get a ride home from the victim, but he got detained at school and felt that she just got tired of waiting and left.
Then, a little more than 2 weeks after the call with Officer Adcock, on February 1st, by this time the search for Hay has ramped up, a different detective calls, asks Adnan about the ride thing, asks him, "Did you tell Officer Adcock you'd asked Hay for a ride?" According to the police report, quote, Adnan said this was incorrect because he drives his own car to school. So, he reverses himself. Why would he do that? Why would he tell the first cop he was expecting a ride and then, once it's clear Hay is missing, change his story? Maybe the girls were thinking of a different day, or maybe Adnan misspoke when he talked to that first cop. Or maybe he did ask Hay for a ride at some point that day, but he's forgotten. Or maybe he's lying. I'm not a detective, but I consider this a red flag. What I don't know is this a teeny tiny red flag, like he just got confused and so what? Or is this like a great big flapping in the breeze red flag? Like maybe he's hiding something. More next week. Serial is produced by Julie Snyder, Dana Chivas, and me. Emily Connon is our production and operations manager. Ira Glass is our editorial advisor. Editing help from Nancy Updike. Fact-checking by Karen Fregala-Smith. Special thanks to Lou Teddy, Phil Levis, and Terry O'Connor. Serial is a production of This American Life and WBEZ Chicago.
Previously on Serial.
He kind of just always generally annoyed me because just the constant paging her if she was out.
Each time that she ended the relationship or took a break, it was never a thing where I was like pestering her or like going to her house, knocking on the door.
He said to me that he was going to tell her his car was broken down and ask her for a ride.
This is a Global Cal-Link prepaid call from
Adnan Syed,
an inmate at the Maryland Correctional Facility.
From This American Life and WBEZ Chicago, it's Serial. One story told week by week. I'm Sarah Koenig. The cops who investigated the murder of Hae-Min Lee were both experienced Baltimore City detectives. Their names were Ritz and McGillivray. Bill Ritz and Greg McGillivray. And how I wish right now that I could play you tape of their perspective on this case, but they didn't want to be interviewed. When Bill Ritz finally turned me down after 6 weeks of back and forth, he said he didn't see the point. The case has been adjudicated, he said. What good would it do? I also spoke on the phone briefly to McGillivray, and he said just a few sentences to me, and one of them was, beyond question, he did it. Meaning Adnan did it. He didn't hem or haw or hesitate. He remembered the case right away. Beyond question, he did it. How did they arrive at that level of certainty? Before Hay's body was found, this was a missing person case. She disappeared January 13th, and the investigation starts out a little slowly, which makes sense to me. She's not a small child. She's 18. She's got a car, which is also missing. That first day, the police call around to her friends. They talk to Aisha, to Adnan. Remember, that's when he tells them he's supposed to get a ride from her, but didn't. The next day, they call around to hospitals, hotels, motels. They check the area around the high school parking lot where she was last seen. You can see from their reports that they immediately hone in on the most time-worn explanation for such disappearances. The boyfriends, current and former. That first day, they called Don, her new guy. They checked the area around his house, which is in another county northeast of Baltimore. Over the next 2 weeks, they keep going back to Don and to Adnan, asking more questions. They checked Don's alibi. He was indeed at work at the LensCrafters store the day Hay went missing, his manager tells them. And they talked to Adnan's track coach to check Adnan's alibi. And it's inconclusive. The coach tells them he can't be sure Adnan practiced that day. They don't take attendance. On February 6th, they do that awful, foreboding thing you see on TV sometimes. They take a team of dogs to check the wooded areas and fields around Woodlawn High School. They used Hay's curling iron for a scent. On February 8th, they make a report saying they're going to check Hay's computer, her AOL account, for clues. And then, on February 9th, their search stops, and a new suspect emerges.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
This is tape from a police interview of the man who finds Hay. He's a little hard to hear on the tape. He's soft-spoken. I'm going to call this man Mr. S. I don't want to use his full name for reasons I promise will become clear. Mr. S works in the maintenance department at a local school.
I think I may have discovered a body in Lincoln Park.
I think I may have discovered a body in Lincoln Park, he says. But before I get to the slightly off-kilter story about how Mr. S discovered this body, just a word here about Lincoln Park. It's actually spelled Leakin Park, Leakin, but almost everyone in Baltimore pronounces it Lincoln Park. It's huge, over 1,000 acres, on the western edge of Baltimore City. It's got a reputation, and not for the beauty of its woods or its trails or its nature center. What it's known for, sadly, is dead bodies. Mention Lincoln Park to people from Baltimore, as I often did, and you're pretty much guaranteed to get a comment like this.
While you're digging in Lincoln Park to bury your body, you're going to find somebody else's. That's Lincoln Park.
When I told the rental car guy in West Baltimore I was working on a story about a girl who was found in Lincoln Park, he said, "Oh yeah? My uncle was found dead in Lincoln Park." A macabre website dedicated to Baltimore murders lists 68 bodies found there since 1946, though the list is missing at least 7 years of stats, so that number is probably low. A lot of law-abiding Baltimoreans, they don't even really know where Lincoln Park is. Rabia Chowdhury, that family friend of Adnan's who first contacted me about this case, when she was explaining it to me, she said, "Yen, how is Adnan supposed to get to Lincoln Park so fast? It's like an hour into the city."
Lincoln Park is nowhere near the school.
Her brother, Saad, Adnan's best friend, he didn't know anything about Lincoln Park either.
After Adnan had initially got arrested, when I was on the phone with him talking, like, when he was locked up, I was like, Lincoln Park, I'm like, where is that? Do you even know where it is? Have you ever been there? And he's like, I have never been there. I don't even know where it is. So, I mean, living around here, we don't know, but it's somewhere in the inner city.
Where Hay was found is in fact less than 3 miles from where Saad and Rabia are sitting right now in an office across the street from Woodlawn High School. It's about a 7-minute drive. They have no idea.
We wouldn't go there. We'd go to the harbor, somewhere nice, but yeah, there's no reason for us to go there.
I'm explaining all this just to say that the simple fact that Hay was found in Lincoln Park, for a lot of people, that alone made Adnan look innocent. Like, what's a nice boy like you doing in a park like this?
And I walked around through the bushes and everything.
So now, Mr. S. He also told the cops he'd never been to that part of Leakin Park before, though he did seem to know that people go fishing back there. Here's what he told the cops. At his job, he'd gotten a work order to shave down a door. But the school didn't have the tool he needed, a plane. He had one at home, though. So during his lunch hour, he said he drove his truck home, got the plane from his basement, and before he left, grabbed some sustenance out of the fridge.
I grabbed a beer out of my refrigerator. It was a 22-ounce Budweiser. And I was drinking on my way back to the school where I work at. And I had to go to the bathroom, so I pulled over. And I went further in the woods so no one could see me urinating. And when I discovered what looked like was a body in the woods.
So he's drinking this 22-ounce Budweiser, and he's heading back to work. And his route to the college is through Leakin Park. And suddenly he has to pee, badly, he says. He stops on Franklin Town Road. He's about 3 miles from work. There's a small pull-off and some concrete barriers, and he walks back in there. Quite a ways, it seems like, for a guy who just has to pee. Later they'd measure. 127 feet back into the woods is where he goes. This next tape is a little upsetting.
And I got back that way. I was getting ready to urinate when I looked down. I seen something look like hair. Something was covered under dirt. And I looked real good again. And until I seen what looked like a foot.
What drew your attention to the area that you went to? There was something there.
It was an open area.
An open area? Mm-hmm. Okay. But there was also a fallen tree, is that correct?
Yes, it was.
All right. I mean, did you go to that area for a certain reason?
No.
No?
No.
All right.
They're suspicious of Mr. S., who by this time has become a suspect in the case. This tape was made on February 18th, 9 days after Mr. S. reported finding the body. They're going over the details carefully because there are parts of his story that are a little weird. One of them is this thing about the fallen tree. 127 feet back into the woods, there was a fallen tree, essentially a 40-foot log, lying more or less parallel to the road. On the other side of the log, if you'd kept going, you'd have gotten to a stream with the unfortunate name of Dead Run. Hay's body was buried right behind this log on the stream side. If you were standing on the street side of the log, so on the other side, it's not at all obvious that you'd notice her. So his story about why he stopped where he stopped, it doesn't quite seem right. Here's Bill Ritz.
When you're walking back to this area where you finally stop, why did you pick that particular area?
Well, to answer that, I didn't pick that area. I was going to go back further except for that's when I seen, the hair. And I seen that foot. That's when I left now.
You said you were going to actually go back further?
Yes.
In this part of the tape, you get a sense of how Ritz and McGillivray operate together, or at least what I've gathered from listening to a bunch of these interviews. McGillivray starts out, all non-judgmental. Just tell me your story. Then Ritz comes in and says something like, just help me understand here, and asks some harder questions, exposing weaknesses in the narrative. Then McGillivray will come back in, but now it's a tougher McGillivray, and he's asking direct, sometimes harsh questions that seem like they'd be good at pushing someone off balance. Like this one, sort of out of the blue.
Have you ever been inside that girl's car before?
No. Never.
Back to the fallen tree. Here Ritz is saying, wait, I thought you told McGillivray you stopped at the log to pee, but now you're saying you were on your way farther back?
Stop there, you said before that you were getting ready to urinate. And then that's when you looked down and discovered the hair.
Yes.
And now you're saying you're going to actually go back further?
Before I discovered it.
Before you discovered it. Maybe I'm a little bit confused. As you're standing on the south side of the tree, between a tree and the road.
This doesn't ever get cleared up, really, and they sort of let it go. But a bunch of things are fishy. The path he takes back into the woods, it doesn't really lead to the log. So why does he end up there? He didn't need to head toward the log to find a hidden spot to pee. There are so many other choices. And if you're walking through brush and brambles, wouldn't you sort of naturally avoid a big log you'd need to step over? What they're trying to get at is, did you really just stumble on this body, or were you looking for this body because you already knew where it was? That is a reasonable question, because Hayes' body wasn't just hard to spot. It was nearly impossible to spot.
All right, we're in the state's attorney's office. We just got delivered the first box of what they're saying is disclosable under whatever Public Information Act that I did.
I didn't understand how camouflaged the body was until I saw photos of the crime scene, the way Mr. S. found it, before they removed the body. I was in the state's attorney's office in Baltimore. I went there with a crime reporter from the Baltimore Sun. His name is Justin George. I've been talking to Justin about the story, and he's interested in maybe writing about it too. We opened a packet of photos together. Some of them were awful to see, as you'd imagine. There was one where you could make out a bit of black hair amid dirt and leaves.
How did he notice
How
that?
can you notice the body? I don't understand that either. I mean, it's pretty well covered.
Yeah, there's barely anything showing. Wait, are we supposed to be looking at something there? What is that? Is that her? That's her. That's all he saw?
Yeah, looks to be part of the body. Yeah, I expected it to be more visible than it is.
Justin and I weren't the only ones who had this reaction. The city's surveyor, a guy named Philip Budemeyer, went out to the burial site to measure the distance from the road. This is before they disinterred her. Here's Budemeyer testifying at trial.
When I arrived at the site where the body was, there was a log on the ground approximately 40 feet long. Okay, I stepped over the log. I walked along the edge of the log expecting to find a body real soon. I never saw one. At which time, had I taken one more step, I would have walked on the grave site where the body was.
And at that point, there were others on the scene?
Yes, ma'am, there was a lot of people there.
And at some point, did somebody point out to you the exact location?
Yes, ma'am. The detective pointed to the site. I looked down at the ground, and I said, well, I don't see any body. It wasn't freshly disturbed.
It was not freshly disturbed.
Yeah, it just blended in with the natural surroundings of the ground.
So here's a guy who's looking for the body, who knows where it's supposed to be, who can see that there are a bunch of people standing around it, and still he can't find it. So does it seem reasonable that Mr. S., who apparently wasn't looking for anything except a secluded place to pee, would have discovered it just like that? The other thing that's a little odd is this business of having to pee. The spot where Mr. S. stops is only a few miles from his house, and only a few more miles from his work, yet he can't wait. Here's Detective Ritz questioning Mr. S. again.
While you were at home, did you have to urinate or use the bathroom at all?
No, I didn't feel like I had to go at the time.
So within 7 or 8 minutes, how much of the 22 ounce of beer had you consumed?
I think it's almost
empty. In that 7-8 minute period, you had to go to the bathroom. It was
yes,
an urgent need, would you say?
Yes, it was.
Yet Mr. S. says he never actually does pee in the woods. He says he ends up waiting until he gets to work. Which, okay, maybe that makes sense. You've had a shock. But why would he walk so far in the first place if he was just trying to have a quick pee? And why was he studying the ground? Ritz asks him about this.
You got out of your vehicle, you ventured back into the woods. When we were out there, we measured it was actually 127 feet off the roadway. As you're walking along, why are you looking down at the ground? Are you looking every step that you take, or you
stumble?
So you wouldn't stumble?
10, 11, 12,
On a freezing day back in February of this year, we went out to Leakin Park. We wanted to know whether it was strange that he had gone so far back into the woods. Like, what does 127 feet from the road look like? My producer Dana was with me, and so was Justin George from the Baltimore Sun. Right at the place where Mr. S had entered the woods, right at the road, Justin noticed a sign.
What's that?
You should look at it. I mean, the sign says a lot.
It said, "This area patrolled. Dumpers will be prosecuted." But you could barely read it. It's hard to read a sign that's covered in graffiti and pierced with 7 bullet holes. And in fact, the cops found 20 cartridge casings in right about this spot when they collected evidence in 1999. Still, I thought the park itself was quite lovely. Brambles and trees. It's rocky near the stream. It's uneven terrain. It's not hilly, but it's not flat either.
It's not nearly as creepy as I imagined it.
I think it is at night.
At night?
Yeah, I think at dusk, I think it is. It's very bleak.
That's bleak.
21, 22, 23.
We walked in what we figured was about 127 feet. Justin paced it out by the yard.
42. Be right about there.
We actually wander around for a while, trying to find the right spot. Finally, I remember that we have a hand-drawn map of the site from that surveyor, Budemeyer, who testified.
40-foot long, 15-inch log on the ground.
Once we get to the right location, it dawns on all of us. 127 feet back doesn't feel all that far if you're looking for privacy. You can still see the cars on the road from where we're standing.
So if he's peeing, yeah. I mean, at least you'd want to come this far. Huh?
Not a lot of foliage, so yeah.
There's nothing. Yeah, I mean, there's like some dead leaves or whatever, but yeah, you can totally see the cars. So actually, that doesn't seem that weird to me.
Suddenly, Mr. S's story seems eminently more believable. While we're in the woods, I fill Justin in on the evidence they collected here.
Right near the body was a liquor bottle from which they got cellular material and never tested, and a rope that was never tested, as far as I know. And then up at the road, they found a condom and a condom wrapper, but I think the condom was still rolled. Like, I don't think it was a used condom necessarily. And they found a bunch of shell casings. They found bullets and shell casings and stuff from 2 different guns. And they found two Blockbuster video, cases. But by the body was, I think the only thing they got right from the area of the body was the liquor bottle and the rope.
I know, it sounds like a game of Clue, except for the condom part. As for the liquor bottle, back at the taped interview with Mr. S, Detectives Ritz and McGillivray want to find out if this guy could be the source of that liquor bottle. Do you drink anything else besides beer, they ask. Yeah, he says. What? Whiskey. What kind? Windsor Canadian whiskey. What denomination? Maybe half a pint.
Did you ever take a bottle into the car with you also, a half a pint? Would you ever take that in the car? Keep you warm.
Sometimes.
Keep you warm. Take a nip here and there. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Now Ritz comes in. We've collected evidence, he says. Cans and bottles from the crime scene. We're going to test them. He's bluffing here, and they never do test. Are we going to find your DNA on one of those bottles, he asks? Maybe you threw a bottle out the window when you were driving past, coming home from work? If so, you better tell us now.
And it's important we know about it because what we're going to do is analyze that and come back 6 months or a month from now or 3 weeks from now and say, we have evidence that you were deceptive with us, that we have DNA proof that you were there. And then you say, oh, Detective Ritz, I forgot. Because I'd gone fishing out there that weekend. I told you that people go fishing out there. And I told you I drank half a pint and I threw a bottle in down, So like I said, take a minute and think if there are any of the items that I described, whiskey bottles, beer bottles, soda cans, or anything like that where you may have discarded in that general area.
I'm not sure. Could have, but I'm not trying to do a lot of things.
He says, I'm not sure, could have, but I'm not positive, because I know I throw a lot of bottles out the window. Ah. Ritz asks, what bottles? Beer bottles. Whiskey, maybe? It's possible, he says. Anything else? Well, for a while he switched to rum. What rum? Dark rum, Bacardi. Finally, McGillivray can't stand it. He just starts listing different kinds of booze.
No gin.
Nah. Back a long time ago.
Vodka.
Years ago.
Brandy.
No brandy.
Cognac.
No.
Just
the whiskey cheap stuff, yeah.
Just cheap stuff, yeah. Brandy. Brandy was the answer they were looking for. The bottle they found near Hayes' body was Coronet VSQ brandy, 200 milliliters. And Mr. S, he blew right past it. Consider for a moment, if Mr. S was just trying to relieve his bladder in peace that February day, minding his own business, and then he sees this terrible, sad sight, and he does the right thing, tells the cops, shows them where she's buried. Well, how horrible now that they're so suspicious of him, that they're considering that maybe either he did it or he knows who did. How terrifying for Mr. S. After all, he seems like a nice, quiet guy, cooperative, doesn't appear to be a brandy drinker. Again, I can only go by the reports and files, but my guess is the reason the cops are holding on to Mr. S as a suspect is because Mr. S has a little bit of a record, which isn't necessarily a big deal. But, and here's the part of the story where I'm hoping you'll understand why I'm not using his name. Mr. S is a streaker, and not the frat party kind, the freaky kind. He's got indecent exposure charges, to borrow a phrase from Adnan's defense attorney, under circumstances that bizarre does not even begin to define. Mr. S is arrested May of '94 for running about naked in a residential neighborhood. 2 years later, March of '96, he's spotted wearing a hoodie, sunglasses, white sneakers, and nothing else. The officer writes, the Southwestern District has received numerous calls for service in the past 3 years to this area for the same incident, same description. Past 3 years. The officer chases down Mr. S onto I-95. Mr. S jumps some chain link fences, the kind with razor wire at the top, ends up in the hospital. It gets worse, or better, depending on whether you enjoy police reports as much as I do. December 7th of 1998, so barely 2 months before Mr. S finds Hayes' body, there's this. At around noon, during what I have to imagine is Mr. S's lunch break, a lady named Margaret is driving along, and here's the report, quote, a black male dashed out in front of my car and began shaking his body in an up and down motion. The male had on no clothes. His penis was exposed as he faced my vehicle, shaking. And this lady, Margaret, is a police officer in uniform. She chases him, but he runs down into the metro stop. Margaret finds his work clothes in a pile and takes them, which means, unless Mr. S has a second outfit stashed someplace, he is riding back to work in the All-Together. And there's another twist to this incident. The same day he flashes Margaret, so December 7th, '98, Mr. S files his own police report. There's been a theft, he says, from his car. Someone's taken his cell phone, his money, his keys, his work clothes. But you and I, we know who has all of it. Officer Margaret. Streaking isn't a violent crime, or necessarily a sexual one. And there's no evidence that Hay was sexually assaulted anyway. But you can imagine both sets of eyebrows rising on Ritz and McGillivray's faces when they see these reports. It's strange behavior. They never asked Mr. S about it on tape, but I figure he knew they knew, and they knew he knew they knew. The same day they interview him on tape, February 18th, they also give him a polygraph test, which he fails. Deception indicated is the conclusion. But the tester also said Mr. S seemed to be nervous because apparently he had an important meeting with a realtor that day. His wife is expecting him to pick her up. So the tester recommends a do-over. About a week later, they give him another polygraph. this time with different questions. For instance, do you know if that girl you found died because she was hit with a tire iron? I guess that's a thing. This time the result is no deception indicated. He passes. And very quickly, Mr. S fades from their view. Here's what my own thoughts were when I learned about Mr. S. I didn't really think, oh, maybe he did it. Maybe he killed Hay. But I did wonder if maybe he'd heard something about the crime and about where she was buried. Because it did seem a tad unbelievable to me that he spotted her the way he said he did. One theory I had was maybe one of his stepkids or a neighbor had told him about the body, because maybe they'd heard about it through other kids at school. And maybe Mr. S, just as a good Samaritan, thought someone needs to go find this girl and tell the cops. But he doesn't want to say he's heard about it beforehand because he doesn't want to get anyone else in trouble. Mr. S didn't want to talk to me. After I made several requests, he asked if I'd please leave him alone. Fair enough. I tried every which way to figure out if he knew, or anyone in his family knew Adnan or Jay or any of the people Jay had told about the murder, and vice versa, whether any of them had ever heard of Mr. S. I found no connections. The closest I got was, bear with me, I found out that Mr. S.'s sister-in-law was a math teacher at Woodlawn back in 1999 when all this happened. So I called her. Hay was her student, she said, an excellent student, top of the line. But she didn't think Mr. S knew anything about the crime before he found the body. She put her husband on the phone, Mr. S's younger half-brother. And he said, you know what's crazy? I used to live next door to the kid that did it. That was back when Adnan was 9 or 10. He said he used to throw the football around with him, and he always seemed like a nice kid. But, again, he said he thought his brother stumbled on the body by accident. Then he paused and chuckled and said, I think he was running through the woods, streaking, and that's how he found it. When I told him that apparently he had stopped to take a pee, he said, that's possible too. So maybe Mr. S is telling the truth. After all, why would a guy who's been in trouble repeatedly for indecent exposure seek out a dead girl, thus inevitably inviting more police contact to rain down upon him? Mr. S wasn't the detective's only lead in this case. We know they were also looking at the boyfriends. And while I don't exactly know why their suspicions about Adnan start to percolate, I have an educated guess. Next week on Serial. Serial is produced by Julie Snyder, Dana Chivas, and me. Emily Condon is our production and operations manager. Ira Glass is our editorial advisor. Editing help from Nancy Updike. Fact-checking by Karen Fergala-Smith. Special thanks today to Natasha Lesser, Lou Teddy, Scott Calvert, and Dave Rosenthal and Andy Rosen from the Baltimore Sun. Our theme music is composed by Nick Thorburn, scoring music by Nick and by Mark Phillips, who also mixed our show. Our website, where you can listen to all our episodes and find photos, letters, and other documents from the case, serialpodcast.org. Serial is a production of This American Life and WBEZ Chicago.